Welcome to a world with limitless possibilities. A world where pain and suffering are matched only by the sounds of those who endure it. Welcome to your nightmare.
Welcome to your nightmare.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare. Happy Mother's Day, listeners. We all know the drill. Brunch mimosas, overpriced carnations, and the frantic scramble to secure a reservation at that bistro your mom likes. But in the town of Oak Haven, brunch has a very different connotation. Tonight, we look at the 1998 Black Brunch incident at the Blackwood Manor. It's a story of legacy, devotion, and a hunger that doesn't live in the stomach, but the marrow. Turn the lights down and lock the doors. And for God's sake, don't keep her waiting. The invitations didn't come by mail. They appeared. On the morning of May 10th, 7 residents of Oak Haven found a heavy cream-colored envelope tucked under their pillows, smelling of damp earth and expensive lilies. Inside was a card embossed with a gold leaf. Mother is coming home. You are requested for the Forest of the First Chord. Sunday, 12 p.m. Blackwood Manor. Dress appropriately. One of these invitees was Sarah Miller. Sarah was a baker, a mother of 2, and a woman who had spent her entire life trying to forget that she was a Blackwood by blood. Her mother, Elena, had appeared 20 years prior, leaving behind nothing but a basement full of rotting meat and a notebook written in a language that made Sarah's nose bleed. Sarah's husband, Mark, told her it was a prank, a sick joke by local teens. But as Sarah held the card, she felt a rhythmic twitching in her abdomen, a phantom kick, like a child in the womb, even though she wasn't pregnant. She had to go. They all did. Because when a Blackwood mother calls, your own blood begins to boil until you say yes. Blackwood Manor sat at the end of a road that the forest seemed to be actively swallowing. By noon, the 7 guests stood before the iron gates. There was Sarah, a local judge named Miller, an old fisherman, and 4 brothers who looked like they hadn't slept since the invitations arrived. The doors groaned open, without a hand to touch them. The air was thick, not just humid, but heavy, like breathing through a wet wool blanket. It smelled of iron and gardenias. In the center of the grand foyer stood a table that stretched 40 feet long. It wasn't made of wood. It looked like polished bone, ivory and yellowed with veins of blue marble running through it. As they sat, the judge tried to stand back up. He screamed as his velvet chair, upholstered in something that felt suspiciously like bruised skin, snapped shut around his waist, like a Venus flytrap. "It's moving! The floor is breathing! Let me out of this!" The judge's scream was cut short by the arrival of the matriarch. She didn't walk in. She drifted. She was wearing a dress made of lace so fine it looked like spiderwebs, and a veil that obscured her face. But it was her height that defied logic. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her limbs elongated and jointed in too many places. "Children," she whispered. The sound didn't come from her throat. It echoed inside the guests' skulls.
Mother is so hungry. Who will we serve?
The first course was served by figures draped in gray burlap. They placed a single silver bowl in front of each guest. Inside was a soup. It was clear yet viscous, floating in the center of Sarah's bowl. Floating in the center of Sarah's bowl was a small, translucent sack. Inside the sack, a tiny, undeveloped eye blinked at her.
Eat,
the matriarch commanded. Sarah watched in horror as the fisherman next to her took a spoon. As soon as the liquid touched his lips, his skin began to turn translucent. You could see his heart pumping black bile. You could see his lungs inflating like gray balloons. Then came the gore. The fisherman's stomach began to distend rapidly, the sound of stretching skin filling the room. A wet, tearing noise, like a leather jacket being ripped apart. He didn't scream. His jaw had fused shut. Within seconds, his torso burst open. Not with a child, but with a swarm of pale, fleshy tendrils that immediately reached for the matriarch. She leaned down and let the tendrils stroke her veiled face, cooing like a proud parent.
A healthy crop,
she hissed. The fisherman's remains were dragged away by the burlap-clad servants, leaving nothing but a trail of streaming, iridescent slime. By the second course, the remaining 6 guests were weeping, but the hunger had set in. A supernatural, ravenous craving that made their teeth ache. The servants brought out a long, pulsating rope of meat. It was purple and red, twisting like a snake on a bed of raw salt. It was an umbilical cord, but it was miles long, coiling into a mountain of glistening gristle.
We are all connected,
the matriarch said, lifting a heavy iron cleaver.
We are all connected,
the matriarch said, lifting a heavy cleaver. She chopped a section for Sarah. As Sarah chewed, she didn't taste meat. She tasted memories. She saw her own birth. She felt a cold scissor snip her cord. But in the memory, it wasn't a doctor holding the scissors. It was the matriarch. And she wasn't cutting the cord, she was sewing it into the floor of the manor. Sarah looked down. Her own navel was bleeding. A thick, wet cord growing out of her, burrowing into the bone-white table. She looked at the other guests. They were all being tethered. They were becoming part of the house. The judge tried to cut his cord with a butter knife. The moment the blade nicked the flesh, the matriarch screamed, a sound that shattered every window in the dining room. The judge's head didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing inward as if his skull had suddenly become a vacuum. His blood didn't spill. It was sucked into the cord, feeding the table. The room was now a slaughterhouse of the divine. The smell of copper was so strong Sarah could feel it coating her lungs.
And now, the gift only a mother can give.
She reached up and peeled back her veil. Sarah wanted to go blind. The matriarch had no face. Only a vertical slit ran from her forehead to her chest. Inside the slit were rows upon rows of needle-like teeth. and nestled at the very bottom was a human infant, perfectly formed, staring out with golden eyes.
I am the vessel,
the matriarch proclaimed.
and you are the fuel.
The cords attached to the guests began to pulse violently. Sarah felt her very essence being drained. Her skin began to sag. Her hair fell out in clumps. She watched as the woman across from her withered into a literal husk, her bones snapping and folding until she was nothing but a pile of dust and a Sunday dress. Sarah realized the horror. This wasn't a brunch. It was a harvest. Every year, the mother needed the life force of her progeny to keep the thing inside her from consuming the world. Sarah, fueled by a primal maternal instinct for her own children waiting at home, did something that the Blackwoods never expected. She didn't pull away. She pushed in. She grabbed the umbilical cord, tethering her to the table, and began to shove her own trauma, her own hatred of the Blackwood legacy, back through the line. She visualized the rot, the neglect, and the pain of her childhood. The cord turned black. The infection traveled up the table, through the floor, and into the matriarch. The matriarch shrieked as the golden-eyed infant inside her began to wail. The vertical slit in her face began to tear further, spilling out a torrent of black, oily fluid that smelled of ancient graves. The house began to moan. The walls bled, the bone table cracked down the center. Sarah grabbed a shard of the broken bone table and hacked through her own cord. The pain was like being struck by lightning, but she was free. She scrambled over the remains of the judge and the fisherman, her feet splashing in a pool of something that was too thick to be blood. Sarah Miller was found wandering the highway 3 days later. Her hair had turned snow white, and she was missing her navel. There was only a smooth, scarred patch of skin where it should have been. Blackwood Manor was gone. Not burned down, not demolished, just gone. In its place was a sinkhole, filled with lilies that bloom all year round, even in the frost of winter. Sarah never spoke again, but every Mother's Day, her children say she sits by the kitchen table and sets 7 extra plates. She cooks a clear, viscous soup, and she waits. But legacy isn't something you can run from. It's something that's fed into you before you're even born. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Be sure to call your mom before she calls you. The cord may be cut, but the connection remains. If you hear a heartache in the floorboards tonight, don't look for the source. Some hungers are better left ignored. That is all for this episode of Nightmare. If you have enjoyed the episodes you've been hearing, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, if you have a story suggestion, please reach out to me at nightmarepod@gmail.com. And until next time, sleep well.